All right, it's time to discuss psychology, neuroscience, and motivation. Let's talk about positive psychology, neuroscience of coaching, and intrinsic motivation. I want to share some research with you that genuinely changed how I approach some sessions. And I promise it won't feel like a neuroscience lecture. It's actually a practical framework disguised as science. A research team at Case Western Reserve University spent years studying what happens in the brain during coaching conversations. And what they found was pretty stark. When a coaching conversation focuses on problems, what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what the client is doing badly, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. Cortisol goes up. The brain goes into a mild threat response. Options narrow, motivation decreases, and the client's capacity to imagine alternatives shrinks. When a coaching conversation is future-oriented, what do you want? What would your ideal situation look like? What's possible? The parasympathetic nervous system activates. Dopamine goes up. Positive emotions increase. Options expand, and motivation and creativity both increase. It's the same person, but radically different physiological responses, determined entirely by the direction of the conversation. The practical takeaway is this: if you want your clients to be more motivated and more creative in finding solutions, lean towards possibility rather than problems. Not because you're pretending that the problems don't exist. You're not doing that. But because the problem-focused brain is a less useful brain for doing the work of financial change. Now, this does not mean avoiding hard conversations. It means sequencing them thoughtfully. Establish the positive vision first, then bring in the honest assessment of the gap. The brain is much better equipped to hear difficult truths when it's already oriented towards a destination. On intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, decades of research consistently show that behavior driven by internal motivation, it's meaningful, it aligns with my values, it's inherently satisfying, produces better outcomes and more durable change than behavior driven by external motivations like rewards, pressure, someone else's approval. What does that mean practically? Well, the more you can help clients connect financial behaviors to their own values and their own vision for their lives, the stickier the change will be. A client who saves for retirement because they genuinely care about the life they're building has something much more powerful than a client who saves because their financial counselor told them to. All right, let's talk about the amygdala, stress, halt, and the coach as clear eyes on the sideline. Let me start with a quick biology lesson. And then I want to make a point about why you're here that I think is one of the most important ideas in this entire program. The amygdala is the brain's alarm center. When it detects a threat, real or perceived, it triggers a stress response. The heart rate goes up. Stress hormones flood the system, and crucially, cognitive function narrows. The brain goes into survival mode. It stops being interested in long-term planning, nuance, or creative problem solving, and it starts being focused on the immediate threat. For a client who is in financial distress, who is afraid, ashamed, overwhelmed, or feeling out of control, this response is active. It may be low-grade and chronic, not acute, but it's still there. And here's the critical implication. You cannot effectively deliver financial education to a client whose amygdala is running the show. They literally can't absorb it the way you intend. They'll nod along, they may even take notes, and then they'll get into their car and most of it will be gone because the stress response was consuming cognitive bandwidth the whole time. So, you need to address the emotional reality first, create the conditions for safety, then, and only then, introduce the financial content. You may have heard of HALT, an acronym that says don't make important decisions when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. It's used in recovery programs and it's applicable here. Any of these states significantly impairs judgment and decision-making. If you can recognize that a client is in one of these states at the start of the session, adjust accordingly. Now here's the bigger point. The one I mentioned is one of my favorites in this whole program. Think about a competitive sport, any sport. A player who's exhausted, behind, and desperate, what are they doing? They're not thinking strategically. They're not seeing the whole field. They're just trying to survive the next play. And now look at the coach on the sideline. He's not exhausted. She's not desperate, not emotionally enmeshed in every individual moment of the game. The coach can see things the player absolutely cannot see. And what does a great coach do? They don't give a speech about the big picture. They give the player one thing to focus on. Watch number 42. He telegraphs every pass. Exploit that. Or stop trying to win the game in the next 2 minutes. Just win the next play. That is exactly what you are for your clients. Clients come to you in a state of financial exhaustion. They're overwhelmed by debt, by confusion, by shame, by the feeling that they'll never get ahead. That exhaustion creates tunnel vision. They can't see the bigger picture, not because they're not intelligent, but because exhaustion and fear literally narrow cognitive function. You are not exhausted and you're not desperate. You can see the whole field. Sometimes you don't need to show them the whole picture yet. Sometimes you just need to give them the next step and then the next one. If you can get them out of that exhaustion phase, the picture opens up on its own. And if you can't yet, give them the next step. That is the real job. Now, let's discuss the self-determination theory, the stages of financial change, and coachability. There are two frameworks here that are directly applicable to how you read clients and calibrate your approach. Self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Ryan, identifies three basic psychological needs that, when met, foster intrinsic motivation. Autonomy, the sense that you're choosing your actions freely, not being controlled. Competence, the sense that you're capable and effective. And relatedness, the sense of meaningful connection with others. The practical implication here is that every interaction with a client should ideally support these three needs. Ask questions rather than give directions. Autonomy. Design action steps that are achievable so clients can experience success. Competence. Build a genuine relationship. Relatedness. When clients feel autonomous, capable, and connected, intrinsic motivation grows. When they feel controlled, incompetent, or isolated, it withers. Now let's discuss the trans-theoretical model, often called the stages of change model. It describes how people move through the process of behavior change. The first stage is pre-contemplation, when you're not aware of or not acknowledging even a need to change. The contemplation stage is when you're aware a problem exists, but you haven't committed to changing it yet. The preparation phase, getting ready to take action. The action phase, actively making the change. And the maintenance phase, sustaining the change over time. Here's a quick story. I once had a client who was referred to me by her employer's wellness program. And from minute one, she was polite, but clearly going through the motions. She'd answer questions, she'd nod, but nothing she said indicated she actually wanted to be there or believed her financial situation needed to change. She was in pre-contemplation. And the single biggest mistake I could have made in that session was to treat her like she was in action. To hand her a budget template and an action plan and expect her to execute it. I spent that whole first session doing nothing but asking questions and listening, not trying to convince her of anything, just creating enough safety and curiosity that the conversation could go somewhere real. By the end of our time together, she said, unprompted, I guess I've been avoiding this for a long time. That was the movement. Pre-contemplation to contemplation. That was the win. On coachability, not every client is ready to be coached, and part of your job is recognizing when someone isn't and not pushing them into a posture they're not ready for. So what are the signs that a client is coachable? They're in a relatively stable situation. They're motivated by a goal or by genuine discomfort with the current state of things. Maybe they're willing to commit to a process rather than just looking for a quick fix. Or maybe they have enough bandwidth, like time, energy, emotional capacity to actually do the work. Signs that a client needs something different first? Maybe they're in an acute crisis. Maybe they're extremely resistant. Maybe they haven't yet acknowledged that the problem exists. Or maybe they're looking for you to solve it for them rather than collaborating on a solution. Read the room, coach the coachable, and for everyone else, meet them where they actually are. All right, let's talk about the working alliance and why the human relationship matters. I want to share a finding from the research literature that I think is the most underappreciated truth in this entire field. When researchers study what actually predicts positive outcomes in coaching and counseling relationships, not what practitioners think predicts outcomes, not what the clients say they want, but what the data actually shows, the answer is not the specific technique used. It's not the methodology. It's not the practitioner's credentials. It's the working alliance. The working alliance has two components. First, client and practitioner agreement on the goals of the work and the tasks involved in pursuing those goals. Second, the emotional bond, the trust, the warmth, the genuine connection between the two people. When both components are present, clients make progress. When they're absent, even technically excellent advice tends to go nowhere. Now, here's the part I want you to really hear. People do more for the people whose opinions they care about than they do for themselves. If someone you don't respect, you don't like, you don't trust, tells you to lose weight, well, guess what? You're probably not going to do it. Not because you disagree with the advice, just because you don't care what they think. If someone you genuinely like, someone you genuinely trust, someone you respect tells you the same thing, someone whose approval matters to you, someone who you don't want to disappoint, something different happens in that moment. you actually might take their advice. This dynamic is not limited to fitness. It's central to financial behavior change. A client who has genuinely bonded with their counselor, who doesn't want to show up to the next session having not done the thing that they said they do, that client is operating with a motivational resource that has nothing to do with their own willpower. The resource is you. Here's a quick story. I worked with a client for about 8 months, and there was a period in the middle where his progress was real but slow. He told me later after we finished that there were several weeks where the only reason he didn't blow up his savings plan was because he didn't want to tell me he'd done it. Not shame, not fear of judgment. He just didn't want to let down someone he'd come to trust. That's the working alliance doing its job. One more thing on this. An app can give you a budget. An AI can give you a savings recommendation. An algorithm can analyze your spending and identify where the leaks are. These are genuinely useful tools, and they can make your job even easier. But an app cannot occupy the emotional position of someone whose approval matters. A program cannot feel disappointed in you in the way that activates your desire not to disappoint it. The human relationship, when it's real, when it's built on genuine trust and genuine care, does something automated tools cannot replicate. That is your advantage. Build that alliance deliberately, and it will do more work than any technique in this program. All right, let's discuss your unique coaching personality, self-awareness, mindfulness, and money history reflection. All right, last lesson of phase 1, and in some ways the most personal. Everything we've covered in this phase, the matrix, the spectrum of financial care, behavioral economics, financial therapy principles, the working alliance, all of it gets filtered through you, through your specific personality, your history, your blind spots, your strengths. And here's the honest truth. The practitioner who knows themselves will consistently outperform the practitioner who knows all the frameworks. Some of your traits will be assets in this work. Curiosity, the genuine kind, not performed, is probably the single most valuable personality trait a financial counselor can have. Directness, when delivered with warmth, helps clients feel respected. Empathy, when it doesn't tip over into over-identification, builds the alliance we just talked about. Even a sense of humor, real but not forced, can make a conversation about financial stress feel survivable. Some of your traits will create challenges. Perfectionism can make you uncomfortable with the client's pace of change. High achiever energy can make you want to give them 20 action steps when they really need to. A personal history with a particular financial topic, debt for instance, or family financial conflict, can cause you to subtly steer towards or away from that topic in ways that serve you, not the client. The work of knowing your traits, which ones are assets and which ones require management, is ongoing, not a one-time exercise. On mindfulness in this context, I'm not asking you to meditate, although if you do that, great. What I am asking is that during sessions, you develop the capacity to notice what's happening inside you while you're simultaneously paying attention to the client. When you feel the urge to give advice, notice it. When you feel uncomfortable with the silence, notice it. When a client situation triggers something in your own history, notice that. That noticing is what separates a reactive practitioner from a present one. Here's the money history reflection practice. I want you to sit with these questions, not answer them once and file them away, but return to them periodically throughout your career. They don't have right answers, they have honest ones. What are your earliest memories involving money? What was the emotional tone of them? How was money discussed in your family? Was it discussed openly, secretly, fearfully, as power, as a source of conflict? How was money used to reward, control, or punish in your family of origin? What did your family believe about people who had money? And what did they believe about the people who didn't? What rules about money did you absorb without realizing it? And which of those rules might be showing up in your sessions today? Here's a quick story from my own experience. Years into my career, I realized I had a pattern. I was consistently more comfortable in sessions with clients who were taking action than with clients who were stuck. And when clients were stuck, I would subtly push a little more urgency in my questions, a little more emphasis on what they weren't doing. When I sat with my own money history, I found it. I grew up in an environment where inaction around money was treated as irresponsibility. Getting stuck was not okay, and I was carrying that into my sessions without knowing it. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And my work with stuck clients, which is a lot of clients, got measurably better. 2 final points on self-awareness tools. First, record your sessions and watch them back. I know it's uncomfortable, especially at the beginning. Nobody wants to watch themselves on video or listen to recordings. But it is the single most powerful self-awareness tool available to you because it shows you what you actually do, not what you think you do. Your pacing, your word choices, where you interrupt, where you go quiet, which client statements you follow and which ones you let pass. You will learn things about yourself that no amount of reflection will ever reveal. Second, find other practitioners to learn from, not just for support, but for growth. The moments when another counselor or coach does something in a session that you've never thought to try, and you have that "I'm stealing that" reaction, those moments are irreplaceable. Peer consultation isn't just about managing burnout, it's about becoming better. Seek it out actively. All right, that's phase one. That's the foundation. We've covered a lot of ground: the role, the matrix, the spectrum of financial care, financial therapy principles, behavioral economics, the neuroscience of motivation, the working alliance, and your own self-awareness as a practitioner. All of that matters. All of it will come back. In phase two, we move into the actual content of personal finance, the 6 financial competencies you need to be fluent in before you can be useful to clients on the substance of their financial lives. So let's keep going.